Hi guys, once again, I'm Sarah Leonard here with 7 Points Prep, your resident college advisor, and today I wanted to talk about letters of recommendation. A lot of questions I get from my students center around who to ask for a letter of recommendation, how to ask for a letter of recommendation, and how many of letters of recommendation should I ask for. So the first thing I want to talk about is how many letters of rec should I ask for. You can find out if the school you're applying to requires letters of recommendation by either going to your dashboard in the Common App. Again, if it's before August 1st, that information might not be accurate, or you can go directly to the school's website. Typically, the letters that they require or ask for don't change from year to year, so you can get kind of an idea of how many letters you might need for a certain school, but you always want to double check after that Common App's been updated on August 1st, and you can see that information right there in your dashboard. The other thing that you should know about letters of recommendation is that some schools require letters of recommendation, some schools have optional letters of recommendation, and some schools don't take letters of recommendation at all. For example, here I'm in Seattle, University of Washington doesn't take any letters of recommendation, and that can be pretty surprising and disappointing to a lot of our students. If a school doesn't ask for a letter of recommendation, I don't recommend that you send a letter, because the biggest thing that you want to do in an application is follow the directions. And if they're not asking for letters of recommendation, unfortunately, that means that they really don't want a letter from you. So, who should you ask for a letter of recommendation? Let's say you're applying to a business program. I definitely recommend that you have a letter from a math teacher or a business teacher, or both, if you can get both of those people to write letters for you. It's super important to have letters of recommendation that showcase your strengths in the program that you're applying to. Now, definitely the rule of thumb is quality over quantity. So if you didn't have such a great relationship with a teacher, it's best probably not to ask them for a letter of recommendation, because if you remember from my last video, you don't get to see the letter before they turn it in. And not that they would write bad things, but there may be a teacher that knows you better that could write you a better letter. That leads me to my next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is, again, who should you ask? You should definitely ask teachers that you feel know you best. If you've had a teacher for more than 1 year, or you had them junior year and you're going to have them senior year, again, that is a great person to ask, because that person knows you over a multitude of years and they can really speak to your growth as a student in their classes. Now, if you had a teacher freshman year or sophomore year, that's not necessarily going to be the best person to ask, even if you really, really loved that teacher, because colleges typically want to see letters of recommendation that are coming from junior year. Oftentimes, when you ask a teacher for a letter of rec, it can be really daunting. And so how do you ask? I recommend that my students ask in the spring of junior year, because a lot of teachers set a limit on the number of letters of recommendation they'll write. And so you want to make sure that you're at the top of that list, so that senior year you're not clamoring to get on that teacher's list and maybe you waited too long and now you can't get a letter of recommendation from that teacher. I've had that happen to some of my students despite me telling them to ask early, and you definitely don't want that to happen to you, because if a school, let's say a school is asking for one letter of rec that's required and then they have an optional one, you definitely want to be able to turn in at least 2 letters of rec to that college, because you're going to be competing with people who definitely have 2 strong letters. And so if you wait too long to ask and you miss out on a letter, it's really going to affect your application negatively. Another thing that you're going to want to think about is asking a teacher that you've shown a lot of growth in their class, or that you've participated a lot or gone in and talked to that teacher before or after school. A well-written letter of recommendation is really going to showcase your achievements in that class beyond your grade. So for example, if you were a C student in that class and you worked your grade up to a B, that's a great teacher to ask. You don't necessarily have to have had an A in that teacher's class in order to ask them for a letter of recommendation. I used to be a teacher in the classroom, and some of the students that I remember the most were teachers that were some of my students that were failing and then ended up in the year with a C or a B. Of course, I remember my A students. They're always the overachievers, and I always remember them, but sometimes it's easier to write a letter of recommendation for someone who's really made a lot of improvement and really shown that effort in class. When you ask your teacher for a letter of recommendation, oftentimes they will ask you for a resume or a list of the activities that you've done. This is great. It helps the teacher get context around who you are and what you're doing, but make sure that you ask that teacher really to focus on your achievements and you as a person in the classroom. Super important. What you don't want the teacher to do is just list all of your achievements, because the admissions officers are already going to see that information in your activities section, and they don't need a list of those other activities. solely in a letter of recommendation. Now, when I used to write letters of recommendation, sometimes I would use that information to augment something I was saying about a student. So for example, I was saying that the student was a very big leader in the community at school, and I was able to see how involved that student was also in church. And I was able to say, this person is a leader in the community across many communities, not just at school, but also at church and other clubs and things that she has done all across her high school career. When you approach your teacher and ask for a letter of recommendation, especially if you do that in the spring, make sure that you let the teacher know that you don't need the letter until fall. I typically recommend letting your teachers know that you're going to need the letter by October 15th because your first deadlines are typically going to be no earlier than November 1st or November 15th. Like I showed you in my last video, you're able to see in the Common App when the teachers turn in the letter. So once you invite them through the Common App, and if you're not sure how to do that, go ahead and check out my video where I explain how to invite your teacher to the Common App. Once you invite them, you're able to see that they've received the invitation. It'll go straight to their email, and then you'll be able to see the status of the letter, and you'll be able to see when it's uploaded. And you'll also be able to assign that teacher or that person to different schools that require different letters of recommendation. Another thing that you may want to do to help teachers really write a good letter of recommendation for you is beyond the form that they ask for, if they ask for a form with all of your achievements, is give them a piece of paper where you discuss your achievements in their class, and again, beyond grades and beyond projects that you've done, but really, what have you learned from the class? How did you feel like you grew as a student in the class? What were your contributions to class, both as an individual and to groups? And how did it change your perspective on what you want to study, or how did it motivate you to study further in that subject in college? That's going to give a teacher a lot of information to go on because, of course, they know you and they've seen your growth, but they don't always know exactly personally what the class meant to you unless you tell them. As a teacher, it always is great for me to have students come back and say, oh, I learned so much from your class. It helped me develop as a person. This is information that you might think about supplementing to your teachers once you ask them for a letter. So that's all I have on letters of recommendation today. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in a comment below, message us on Instagram, and good luck with those applications, and we'll see you soon for the next video. Once again, I'm Sarah Leonard with 7 Points Prep, and we'll see you soon.